Sneering across the polished mahogany, my mother-in-law spat the words, "gold digger," treating the 30-page postnuptial agreement between us like a drawn weapon. She made it explicitly clear I would never touch a dime of their family's precious fortune. It took everything I had to suppress a laugh. While they frantically guarded a paltry $20 million trust fund, they remained blissfully unaware of my own $1 billion empire. The hardest part about having an incomprehensible amount of money isn't the wealth itself, it's the paranoia that comes with it. When my co-founder, Sarah Harris, and I started Aegis Data Solutions out of a cramped, unheated apartment in Dakota, we were surviving on instant ramen and sheer, unadulterated panic. We built an AI-driven logistics platform that solved critical supply chain bottlenecks for massive global retailers. By the time I was 26, we had quietly secured contracts with three of the largest shipping conglomerates on Earth. By 28, Sequoia Capital led our Series C funding round, pushing our valuation past the unicorn mark. Today, at 31, my personal net worth hovers around $2.1 billion. But if you looked at me, you would never know. I drive a 6-year-old Volvo XC90. I buy my clothes at mid-tier department stores, and I still flinch when I see a $14 avocado toast on a menu. Growing up in a trailer park in Ohio leaves permanent scars on your psyche. Poverty is a ghost that haunts you long after your bank account overflows. Because of that, and because I loathed the parasitic nature of the ultra-rich circles I occasionally had to navigate, I chose to remain entirely out of the spotlight. I let Sarah do the Forbes covers and the Bloomberg interviews. To the world, I was just a quiet, behind-the-scenes software developer. And to my husband, Rio Sterling, I was a freelance graphic designer who did okay building websites for local businesses. I didn't set out to lie to Rio. When we met at a local coffee shop in downtown Boston, it was a breath of fresh air. He spilled his Americano on my laptop bag, apologized profusely, and offered to buy my next coffee. He didn't see a billionaire. He saw a girl in a faded Yale sweatshirt violently typing on a keyboard. For the first time in years, someone was interested in me. Not my portfolio, my angel investments, or my network. We fell in love fast. Rio was charming, handsome, and carried himself with the relaxed confidence of a man who had never had to worry about where his next meal was coming from. He was a junior partner at Sterling Financial, a boutique wealth management firm founded by his grandfather. But then, I met his parents. Henry and Eleanor Sterling were the epitome of New England old money pretenders. I call them pretenders because true old money whispers. The Sterlings screamed. Their entire identity was wrapped up in their Greenwich, Connecticut estate, their country club memberships, and the illusion of immense aristocratic wealth. In reality, I had run a quiet background check on Sterling Financial before the wedding. The firm managed a respectable portfolio, and the family's personal net worth was roughly $15 to $20 million. A comfortable life, certainly, but in the circles I ran in, $20 million was a seed round. To Eleanor Sterling, however, $20 million made them royalty, and I was the peasant trying to storm the castle. From the day Rio brought me home, Eleanor's disdain was palpable. She would look at my modest engagement ring, a simple, beautiful vintage diamond Rio had picked out himself, and sigh. She constantly made passive-aggressive comments about my little computer hobby, and frequently forgot what I did for a living. "Lucy, dear," Eleanor would say at dinner parties, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "are you still doing those little internet drawings? You know, Beatrice's husband just made partner at his law firm. Real work is so demanding, isn't it?" I would just smile into my wine glass. "It keeps me busy, Eleanor." We had been married for 2 years. 2 years of Rio standing up for me in private, but shrinking under his mother's overbearing shadow in public. I excused his spinelessness because I loved him, and I thought our quiet life in our mortgaged Boston townhouse was enough. I paid for our groceries, our utilities, and quietly took care of the sudden maintenance issues on our cars, funneling my own money into a joint account and framing it as good months with client contracts. Rio, bless his oblivious heart, patted me on the back and told me he was proud of my little hustle, while he paid the mortgage to feel like the provider. I was planning to tell him the truth. I really was. Our second anniversary was approaching, and I had finalized the purchase of a sprawling, private island estate in the Maldives. I was going to fly him out there, sit him down, hand him the actual financials of Aegis data, and watch his jaw drop. I wanted to build an empire with him by my side. But then came the Thanksgiving dinner at the Sterling estate. The night the illusion of my happy marriage shattered into a million jagged pieces. The drive to Greenwich was tense. The trees were stripped bare by the late November chill, and the sky was a bruised, heavy purple. Rio had been acting strange all week, fidgety, avoiding eye contact, spending an unusual amount of time taking hushed phone calls in the garage. "Are you okay?" I asked, reaching across the center console to squeeze his hand. His palm was clammy. "Fine. Just, you know how my parents get around the holidays. The firm is doing a restructuring, and my dad is stressed. Just try to play nice with my mother tonight, okay, Lucy? Don't take her bait." "I never take her bait, Rio," I replied softly, pulling my hand back. "I just sit there and let her insult my wardrobe." When we arrived at the sprawling Tudor-style mansion, the driveway was lined with luxury cars. Inside, the house smelled of expensive pine, roasted duck, and suffocating pretension. Eleanor greeted us at the door wearing a street John knit suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. She offered her cheek to Rio and gave me a tight, dismissive nod. "Lucy, I see you're still wearing that practical little coat." "Good to see you too, Eleanor," I said, handing my coat to the maid. Dinner was a grueling affair. Henry Sterling sat at the head of the table, holding court, discussing golf handicaps and the burden of managing high-net-worth clients. Beatrice, Rio's older sister, spent the entire meal bragging about her upcoming ski trip to Gstaad. I kept my head down, pushing my asparagus around my plate, counting the minutes until we could leave. As the plates were being cleared for dessert, Henry suddenly cleared his throat. "Rio, my boy, be a sport and head down to the wine cellar. Fetch that 2005 Bordeaux, would you? The one behind the locked grate. Take your time. Make sure it's the right vintage." Rio stiffened. He shot a panicked glance at me, then looked down at his lap. "Sure, Dad." He practically bolted from the room. I frowned, watching him go. The heavy oak door of the dining room clicked shut behind him, and suddenly, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Lucy," Henry said, his jovial tone evaporating instantly. "Join us in the study. Now." It wasn't a request. I followed Henry and Eleanor down the mahogany-paneled hallway, a knot forming in my stomach. When we entered the study, a room suffocated by dark leather, cigar smoke, and antique globes, there was a fourth person waiting. It was Arthur Pendleton, the Sterling family's bulldog of an attorney. He was a sharp-featured man in a bespoke suit, clutching a thick leather briefcase. "Take a seat, Lucy," Eleanor commanded, gesturing to a stiff wingback chair opposite Henry's massive desk. I remained standing. "What is this about?" Arthur unlatched his briefcase with a loud snap. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, neatly bound, and slid them across the desk toward me. "This," Henry said, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the desk, "is a postnuptial agreement." I stared at the thick stack of paper, the words slowly registering in my brain. "Excuse me? Rio and I have been married for 2 years." Eleanor let out a sharp, aristocratic scoff. She paced around the room, swirling a glass of scotch. "Yes, and it's 2 years too long without safeguarding this family's legacy. Rio's grandfather's trust is set to disperse in 3 months. That is a substantial sum of money. Lucy, generational wealth. Money that was built by Sterlings, for Sterlings." "I don't care about the trust fund," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I have my own money." Eleanor actually laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that echoed off the leather-bound books. "Your own money? Please, you design menus for local diners. Do you think we are fools? We know exactly what you are doing. You latched onto my son because he was your ticket out of whatever middle-class mediocrity you crawled out of. You are a leech, Lucy." a gold digger, and we are severing the vein. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wasn't hurt by her insults. I was furious at Rio. Does Rio know about this? Rio understands his obligations to this family, Henry said coldly. He knows that if he wants his seat at the table at Sterling Financial, and if he wants his share of the trust, his assets must be protected from outside vulnerabilities. In the event of a divorce, he knew you were doing this tonight, I whispered, the puzzle pieces clicking together, the hushed phone calls, the nervous sweating, leaving for the wine cellar so he wouldn't have to look me in the eye while his parents slaughtered me. My husband was a coward. Arthur, explain the terms to her, Eleanor snapped. The lawyer pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up his nose. It's quite standard, Mrs. Sterling. It is a mutual waiver of assets. In the event of dissolution of the marriage, you will waive all rights to alimony, spousal support, and any claim to the Sterling family trust, properties, or liquid assets. You leave with exactly what you brought into the marriage. Nothing. I walked slowly toward the desk and looked down at the document. And if I refuse to sign? I asked. Then I will make it my personal mission to ensure my son divorces you before the trust pays out, Eleanor hissed, stepping close to me. I could smell the gin on her breath. We will drag you through court. We will bury you in legal fees until you are bankrupt. You will walk away with nothing anyway, but you will do it completely ruined. I looked down at the paper. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from an adrenaline-fueled mixture of heartbreak and dark, dangerous amusement. I picked up the document and flipped to the asset division clause. My eyes scanned the dense legalese. Arthur had used a standard boilerplate template for high-net-worth individuals protecting themselves against poorer spouses. Parties hereby agree to a mutual waiver of all independently owned corporate entities, private shares, venture capital returns, and intellectual property acquired prior to and during the marriage. Neither party shall have claim to the business revenues of the other. A mutual waiver. They were so focused on protecting their pathetic $20 million estate that they hadn't bothered to investigate me. They assumed I had nothing, so they drafted a completely ironclad mutual waiver. By trying to lock me out of Rio's trust fund, they were legally, entirely, and permanently locking Rio out of Aegis Data Solutions. They were forfeiting his legal right as my spouse under marital property laws to half of my $2.1 billion empire. I almost smiled. It was the greatest gift my vicious mother-in-law could have ever given me. "Where is the pen?" I asked softly. Eleanor smirked triumphantly, shooting a victorious look at her husband. She handed me a cheap plastic ballpoint pen from the desk. Smart girl. At least you know when you're beaten. I clicked the pen. I didn't read another word. I flipped to the back page and signed my name, Lucy Kensington Sterling, in bold, heavy ink. I initialed every page as Arthur instructed, sealing my total financial independence from their family forever. Just as I handed the document back to the lawyer, the study door creaked open. Rio stood there, holding a dusty bottle of wine. He looked at the signed documents on the desk, then at me, his face flushed with guilt. "Lucy," he mumbled. "It's just protocol, babe. It's just to protect the family legacy. Nothing changes between us." I looked at the man I had loved, the man I was going to give the world to. He looked so small to me now. "You're right, Rio," I said, grabbing my purse and slipping past him toward the door. "Nothing changes. You get to keep your family's legacy, and I get to keep mine." I walked out of the house, leaving him standing in the study. As I started my old Volvo in the driveway, the tears finally came. I cried for the death of my marriage, but as I pulled out of the gates of the Sterling estate, the tears stopped. The grief was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating rage. They wanted to play a game of wealth and power? Fine. I was about to show them what real power looked like. The morning after Thanksgiving, the townhouse felt like a tomb. I didn't sleep. Instead, I spent the night systematically erasing my presence from the life Rio and I had built. I packed 2 suitcases, just the clothes I had bought myself, my laptop, and the vintage Yale sweatshirt I was wearing the day we met. I left the engagement ring on the kitchen island, right next to the electric bill I had quietly paid 3 days prior. Rio emerged from the bedroom around 7:00 a.m., looking rumpled and hungover. He stopped in the hallway when he saw my bags. "Lucy, come on," he sighed, rubbing his temples, adopting the tone of a tired parent dealing with a petulant child. "Are we really doing this?" It was just a piece of paper. My dad was putting pressure on me, and Arthur was already there. "You know I love you. Let's just talk about it." "There is nothing to talk about, Rio," I said, zipping up my second suitcase. "You stood by while your mother called me a gold digger. You let your father ambush me with a lawyer. You chose your $20 million trust fund over your wife. I'm making it easy for you. You don't have to worry about me stealing your legacy anymore." "You're overreacting," he pleaded, stepping closer, though he made no move to actually stop me. "Where are you even going to go? You can't afford a place in the city on your freelance salary. Just stay. We'll go to couples counseling." I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt absolutely nothing. The illusion was entirely broken. "I'll manage," I said softly. I picked up my bags, walked out the front door, and never looked back. 30 minutes later, I pulled my old Volvo into the underground parking garage of a sleek, 60-story glass skyscraper in the financial district. I bypassed the main lobby and took the private executive elevator directly to the penthouse floor. The doors slid open to reveal the sprawling, minimalist headquarters of Aegis Data Solutions. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Boston skyline. My co-founder, Sarah, was already in my office, drinking a kale smoothie and reviewing quarterly projections. When she saw me walk in with suitcases, her eyebrows shot up. "Well," Sarah said, setting her tablet down, "I'm assuming Thanksgiving with the New England aristocracy didn't go well?" I dropped my bags and tossed a crumpled photocopy of the postnuptial agreement onto my massive glass desk. "They ambushed me, made me sign a mutual waiver of assets. They think I'm destitute and trying to steal Rio's trust fund." Sarah picked up the document, her eyes scanning the legal jargon. As she reached the asset division clause, a slow, predatory smile spread across her face. Sarah was a brilliant engineer, but she was an even more vicious businesswoman. "A mutual waiver," she whispered, looking up at me in disbelief. "Lucy, tell me they didn't." "They did." Sarah burst into a fit of breathless laughter. "They drafted a boilerplate ironclad waiver without doing a single background check on you. They just legally severed Rio's right to half of a $2 billion tech conglomerate to protect a measly $20 million. They handed me the keys to my own cage," I said, finally allowing myself to smile. "I need you to call Victoria Stanton. Tell her I need her on retainer, immediately. I want this divorce finalized before Christmas. And Sarah?" "Yeah?" "No more hiding. Call the PR team. It's time to announce the Aegis Ventures expansion. And tell the Wall Street Journal I'm finally ready to do that sit-down interview." Victoria Stanton was the most feared divorce attorney on the East Coast. She charged $2,000 an hour and wore tailored Tom Ford suits that looked like armor. When we met in her pristine conference room, I handed her the Postnup. "It's airtight," Victoria said, tapping her manicured nail against the signature line. "Arthur Pendleton is a dinosaur, but he knows how to write a suffocating contract. The beauty of this is his own arrogance. By explicitly stating that neither party has claimed to independently owned corporate entities or venture capital returns acquired prior to or during the marriage, he has completely shielded your equity in Aegis. Rio gets his little trust fund, you get your empire." "How fast can we push the divorce through?" I asked. "If we contest nothing?" "Weeks," Victoria replied, her eyes gleaming. "I will draft the filings today. We will give them exactly what they want. Total capitulation." The mediation took place 2 weeks later in Arthur Pendleton's stuffy mahogany office. I arrived wearing a modest, off-the-rack beige sweater and no makeup, playing the part of the defeated, discarded wife to perfection. Rio sat across from me, refusing to make eye contact, looking simultaneously guilty and relieved. Eleanor, of course, had insisted on being there, perched on a leather sofa like a hawk watching a mouse bleed out. Victoria sat beside me, utterly stoic. My client acknowledges the validity of the postnuptial agreement, Victoria said smoothly, sliding the divorce papers across the table. She is making no claim to the townhouse, the shared vehicles, the joint bank accounts, or the Sterling family trust. She is walking away with only her personal effects. Eleanor let out a soft, triumphant scoff. Sensible. I'm glad you finally understand your place, Lucy. It's a shame it had to come to this. But Rio's future must be protected. Rio flinched. Mom, please, don't. Let her speak, Rio, I said quietly, looking directly into his eyes. She won. Arthur pushed the papers toward Rio. Sign here, son, and it's done. Rio signed his name quickly, his hand trembling slightly. I signed mine with a steady, deliberate stroke. When the notary stamped the final page, the marriage was legally, undeniably over. We were severed. The invisible cord tying my billions to his mediocrity was cut forever. As we stood up to leave, Eleanor stepped into my path. She looked me up and down with absolute disgust. I hope you saved some of that freelance money, Lucy. The rental market in this city is quite unforgiving for a single woman with no assets. I leaned in close to her, lowering my voice so only she could hear. You have no idea what you've just done, Eleanor. But you will. I walked out of the office, Victoria matching my stride. As we stepped into the elevator, Victoria checked her phone. The judge will rubber stamp this by Friday, she said. You're a free woman, Lucy. I looked at my reflection in the polished steel doors of the elevator. The timid, accommodating wife was dead. The billionaire was awake. Good, I said. Now, let's destroy them. Over the next 6 months, my life transformed with whiplash-inducing speed. With the divorce finalized and my assets legally firewalled, the PR embargo on my identity was lifted. I stepped out of the shadows. Forbes ran a cover story in March. The Invisible Architect. How 1 year-old Lucy Kensington built a $2 billion AI supply chain empire in secret. The article detailed my impoverished upbringing, the founding of Aegis out of a freezing apartment, and the massive, silent contracts we held with the world's largest logistics firms. It was a media sensation. My face was suddenly on CNBC, Bloomberg, and the front page of the Wall Street Journal. I ignored all the frantic, hysterical voicemails from Rio. I blocked his number, his father's number, and his sister's number. They were in my rearview mirror. I was focused on the future. Specifically, I was focused on Aegis Ventures, our new private equity arm. We were using our massive cash reserves to buy up distressed corporate debt and acquire failing legacy businesses to integrate into our data ecosystem. And as fate and meticulous background research would have it, Sterling Financial was drowning. Behind their country club memberships and vintage wine cellars, the Sterling family was financially hemorrhaging. Henry Sterling had made a series of catastrophic, highly leveraged bets on commercial real estate just before a massive market downturn. A sprawling office park complex they had heavily invested in outside of Boston went bankrupt, defaulting on its loans. Sterling Financial had guaranteed those loans using their own firm's capital and, crucially, the collateral of the Sterling family trust as a backstop. By June, Sterling Financial was facing a margin call they couldn't meet. They were $70 million in debt, and the bank was threatening to liquidate their firm, seize their assets, and wipe out the trust entirely. Henry was desperately seeking a white knight, a larger holding company, to buy their debt and absorb their firm, allowing them to save face and avoid total public ruin. Enter Obsidian Capital, a boutique, aggressive private equity firm known for ruthless acquisitions. What Henry, Eleanor, and Rio didn't know was that Obsidian Capital was a wholly owned subsidiary of Aegis Ventures. It was my company. Through proxies and aggressive legal maneuvering, Obsidian Capital bought up Sterling Financial's distressed debt from their creditors for pennies on the dollar. Almost overnight, Obsidian became the majority debt holder of Sterling Financial. We held all their notes. We owned their building, their firm, and the liens on their personal assets. They were summoned to New York for the restructuring meeting. The meeting was set for a Tuesday morning in a sprawling, glass-walled boardroom on the 50th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper. I arrived early. I was wearing a bespoke charcoal Chanel suit, a Patek Philippe Nautilus on my wrist, and a pair of $400 stilettos. I sat at the head of the massive obsidian conference table, my back to the door, looking out over the sprawling expanse of the city. At precisely 10:00 a.m., the heavy wooden doors swung open. I heard the hushed, nervous voices of my former in-laws. "Just let me do the talking," Henry was saying, his voice tight with anxiety. "Obsidian is ruthless, but they need us to manage the client transition. We have leverage. We just need to convince their CEO to restructure the debt over 10 years. "And the trust, Henry?" Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. "They can't touch the trust, can they?" "It's collateral, Eleanor," Henry snapped. "Just smile and be polite." I spun my leather chair around to face them. The silence that fell over the room was absolute, deafening, and delicious. Henry stopped dead in his tracks, his briefcase slipping from his hand and hitting the carpeted floor with a dull thud. Eleanor's jaw physically dropped, the color completely draining from her heavily Botoxed face. Rio stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror, confusion, and a sickening realization. "Hello, Henry." "Eleanor," I said, my voice smooth and echoing in the cavernous room. "Rio, please have a seat." Nobody moved. They were frozen in a state of sheer, unadulterated shock. "Lucy?" Rio finally managed to choke out. "What? What are you doing here?" "This is Obsidian Capital. We're here to meet the CEO." I gestured to the empty chairs opposite me. "You are meeting the CEO, Rio. Obsidian Capital is a subsidiary of Aegis Ventures, which is a subsidiary of Aegis Data Solutions, which I own." Eleanor stumbled backward, catching herself on the doorframe. Her breath was coming in short, erratic gasps. "No, no, that's impossible. You're a freelancer. You draw menus." I smiled, a cold, sharp expression that didn't reach my eyes. "I lied, Eleanor. I didn't want my money defining my relationships. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not what I was worth. But you couldn't allow that, could you? You were so terrified I was going to steal your precious $20 million trust fund." I picked up a thick legal binder from the table and dropped it heavily onto the glass surface. The sound made Rio jump. "By the way," I continued, leaning forward, "my net worth was updated last month after our latest valuation. It's $2.4 billion now. If you hadn't forced me to sign that mutual waiver, Rio, you would have been legally entitled to half of it in the divorce, $1.2 billion. But instead, you let your mother protect your legacy." Rio looked like he was going to vomit. His knees gave out, and he sank into one of the leather chairs, burying his face in his hands. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Oh my God." Henry's face flushed a deep, dangerous purple. He marched toward the table, slamming his fists down. "This is a setup. This is illegal. You orchestrated this out of spite." "Spite?" I laughed, a genuine hard sound. "Henry, this is just business. You made catastrophic investments in a volatile real estate market. You over-leveraged your firm. You used your family's trust as collateral. You ruined yourself. I just bought the debt. And as the majority debt holder, I am calling it in. All of it." "You can't do that," Eleanor shrieked, tears of sheer panic ruining her mascara. "That's our entire life. The firm, the house, Rio's trust. It's all we have." "You should have protected it better," I said, my voice dropping to a glacial chill. "As of this morning, Obsidian Capital is liquidating Sterling Financial. Your firm is dissolved. Your assets will be seized to cover the $70 million you owe me. The estate in Greenwich will be foreclosed upon by the end of the month. And that sacred trust fund you fought so hard to protect from me? It's gone. Wiped out to pay your creditors." Rio looked up at me, his eyes red and pleading. "Lucy, please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't stand up for you. You loved me once. Please, don't do this to us. Don't leave us with nothing." I looked at the man I had once planned to give the world to. He was weak. He had always been weak. I'm not leaving you with nothing, Rio, I said, standing up and buttoning my suit jacket. I'm leaving you with exactly what you brought into the marriage, just like Arthur Pendleton wrote it. I picked up my briefcase and walked toward the door. As I passed Eleanor, she was sobbing uncontrollably into her hands, the illusion of her aristocratic superiority shattered into dust. Goodbye, Eleanor, I whispered as I walked past. I hope you saved some of that old money. The rental market is quite unforgiving. I walked out of the boardroom, the sound of their despair echoing behind me, and stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, I looked at my reflection in the polished steel. I wasn't the girl in the faded Yale sweatshirt anymore. I was the architect of my own empire and the queen of my own reality, and the view from the top was absolutely breathtaking. The implosion of the Sterling family was neither quiet nor graceful. In the brutal, unforgiving ecosystem of New England high society, wealth is the only shield you have. Once that shield is pierced, the wolves circle. Within 2 weeks of Obsidian Capital liquidating Sterling Financial, the news hit the financial sector like a shockwave. The real-life corporate vultures descended. The physical office building that housed Sterling Financial was auctioned off and swallowed whole by the Blackstone Group to be gutted and turned into luxury condos. J.P. Morgan Chase, where Henry had held his private banking accounts for 4 decades, quietly and efficiently froze their remaining overdrafted credit lines and closed their accounts. But the financial ruin was only the beginning. The social execution was far worse. Eleanor's pristine, carefully curated world unraveled completely. I heard through the Boston grapevine that she had tried to maintain her weekly lunches at the Greenwich Country Club, pretending the liquidation was just a minor restructuring. That illusion shattered the day her platinum card was declined in front of 3 other society wives while trying to pay for a round of mimosas. The club quietly asked her to surrender her membership the following week due to unpaid dues. Beatrice, Rio's insufferable sister, faced her own brand of karma. The moment her husband, the hotshot lawyer, realized the Sterling family trust was completely wiped out and there would be no generational inheritance, he filed for divorce. He cited irreconcilable differences, but everyone in their zip code knew the truth. He had married her for the same reason Eleanor accused me of marrying Rio. Without the money, Beatrice was just a loud, demanding woman with expensive tastes and empty pockets. I didn't seek out these updates. They just drifted up to the penthouse floor of Aegis Data Solutions like debris from a shipwreck. I was too busy building my empire to obsess over the people I had destroyed. Aegis was preparing for a massive IPO, and my days were consumed by meetings with SEC regulators and venture capitalists. But karma has a funny way of demanding an audience. It was a rainy Tuesday in late October, exactly 1 year since that fateful Thanksgiving dinner. I was sitting in the back of my chauffeured Maybach, reviewing term sheets on my tablet, as we pulled up to a high-end corporate networking event at the Four Seasons in downtown Boston. As my driver opened the door and handed me an umbrella, my eyes landed on a figure standing near the valet podium. It was Rio. He was wearing a slightly frayed, off-the-rack gray suit that didn't quite fit him right. He was holding an oversized umbrella over a wealthy-looking executive who was aggressively barking orders into a cell phone. Rio wasn't a guest at the event. He was working for an executive concierge service, fetching cars and holding doors. He looked up, and our eyes locked through the pouring rain. The color drained from his face. The confident, relaxed junior partner I had married was completely gone. In his place was a hollow, exhausted man who looked like he had aged 10 years in 12 months. He lowered the umbrella slightly, completely disregarding the executive cursing at him as the rain hit his expensive coat. I stopped. I could have walked past him. I could have ignored him and stepped into the warm, glittering lobby of the hotel. But a small, lingering ghost of the woman who used to love him compelled me to step out from under my driver's umbrella and walk over to him. "Hello, Rio," I said, my voice steady over the sound of the rain. He swallowed hard, his hands trembling on the handle of the umbrella. "Lucy, you look incredible." "I hear things have been difficult," I said, my tone completely neutral. He let out a bitter, self-deprecating laugh. That's one way to put it. Dad had a minor heart attack in January. The medical bills wiped out whatever liquid cash we had left from the house foreclosure. A partner from Goldman Sachs bought the Greenwich estate. Mom is living in a two-bedroom apartment in a Boston suburb, working as a receptionist for a mid-tier real estate agency. She has to take the bus. And you? I asked, looking at the cheap fabric of his suit. Nobody in the financial district will touch me, Rio muttered, looking down at his scuffed dress shoes. My name is toxic. The firm's collapse was too public. I'm doing this. Executive assisting. Just to make rent. I barely recognize my own life. He looked back up at me, his eyes wide and desperate, shining with the rain and unshed tears. Lucy, please. I know I deserve everything that happened. I know I was a coward. But we are drowning. My mother is broken. My father can barely get out of bed. You won. You proved your point. Could you just offer me an entry-level position at Aegis? Anywhere. Even in the mailroom. I just need a chance to survive. I looked at him, feeling the cold Boston rain misting against my skin. I searched my heart for a shred of pity, a sliver of the girl who used to secretly pay his electric bills and buy his groceries. But that girl had died in a mahogany study in Greenwich, suffocated by a 30-page postnuptial agreement. I can't do that, Rio, I said softly, but with absolute finality. Why not? His voice cracked. It's a drop in the bucket for you. You're worth billions. It wouldn't cost you anything. Because of the legacy, I replied, stepping closer to him. Your parents were absolutely right about one thing. Wealth has to be protected. You have to aggressively firewall your assets from people who haven't earned them, people who might drag you down. Arthur Pendleton wrote it best. Neither party shall have claim to the business revenues of the other. Rio flinched as if I had physically struck him. You made your choice, Rio, I said, turning away from him. You chose your family's 20 million over me. I'm just honoring the paperwork you forced me to sign. I walked away, my heels clicking sharply against the wet pavement. I stepped into the warm, golden light of the Four Seasons lobby, leaving my ex-husband out in the cold rain, holding an umbrella for a man he used to consider his equal. I never looked back. I had an empire to run, and the future was looking extraordinarily bright. Did Lucy go too far? Or was this the ultimate, well-deserved karma for a family blinded by their own greed? Drop a comment below and tell us whose side you are on. If you loved this story of vengeance, wealth, and sweet justice, please hit that like button, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more dramatic, real-life-inspired stories.